Ready for a deep dive? We're going into some fascinating Romanian literature this time.
Sounds intriguing.
We're getting into Alexandru Lăpușneanu.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard the name, but
He's been a real inspiration to writers, like for centuries.
yeah, I was gonna say, he must have done something to stick around this long, right?
Oh, definitely left a mark on Romanian storytelling. We've got excerpts from this Romanian document, all Lăpușneanu all the time.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this guy, intense.
Intense in, like, what way? What are we talking about here? Good, intense, bad intense.
That's what makes him so captivating.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to find out. Who was this guy, Alexandru Lăpușneanu? What made him so fascinating? And, centuries later, why are we still talking about him? What makes this story relevant now?
Well, first things first, I think we got to establish that Alexandru Lăpușneanu wasn't just, like, a character in a book, right? This was a real historical figure.
Get out.
The Prince of Moldavia back in the 16th century.
Okay, so not your average literary inspiration then.
Not your average prince either.
Okay.
This guy was known for, like, his iron fist. He ruled with very much an unforgiving hand. You could even say brutal.
Brutal prince who inspired generations of writers. I got to say, there's got to be more to the story. Like, how does a guy go from that to, almost legend status?
And that is the big question, the paradox almost, right? Like, how does this happen? But, he is remembered as a complex, even tragic figure in a lot of Romanian literature.
Ooh, a tragic villain. Love it. Always keeps you guessing.
Right. You never know which way it's going to go. But to understand a figure like this, like Lăpușneanu, I think we need to understand the world he lived in a little bit.
Okay.
So in Romanian history, you come across this term a lot. Voivod.
Voivod.
Yeah, voivod. It refers to a prince, a ruler, someone very much in Lăpușneanu's position.
Okay, so like a king, but maybe with a few more occupational hazards.
Yeah, just a bit more pressure, right? Imagine leading Moldavia in the 16th century. I mean, you've got constant power struggles, threats from everywhere. A voivod, they had to make tough decisions, and sometimes, those decisions, they came with a heavy price.
Starting to see the appeal here. Okay, so we've got this Shakespearean character dropped right into, like, the most intense period of Romanian history.
Yeah.
Was there actually a Shakespeare comparison in the document?
You are spot on. I mean, they actually compare him to Hamlet.
I knew it.
Yeah.
That brooding, conflicted energy, it makes sense. Now, tell me about this romantic hero thing, because from what I'm reading, hero doesn't usually involve, well, this much chaos.
Right, and that's what makes Lăpușneanu so interesting, because he does embody this idea of the romantic hero in that he possesses, exceptional qualities, but he's thrust into these extraordinary situations.
And when you say extraordinary?
Larger than life, capable of great things,
okay,
but also capable of great darkness.
Right.
And I think that's what we see with these romantic heroes. It's that those exceptional qualities can be both admirable and terrifying. His strength, his determination, but also his ruthlessness, his willingness to do whatever it takes to achieve his goals. He's both captivating and morally ambiguous, much like, Hamlet.
A complicated man in a complicated job.
Exactly. And Romanian literature often blurs those lines between historical fact and literary invention.
It's like they're saying, hey, history's already wild, we might as well make it a great story.
Right, exactly. And so they use these figures to explore really universal themes.
Okay.
Ambition, betrayal, the corrupting nature of power, even love. Which kind of brings us to Doamna Roxanda.
Oh, yes, his wife. This is where it gets good. The document describes her as, get this, angelic and demonic.
Wow, what a combination.
Talk about a power couple.
A woman of contrasts, mirroring her husband a bit there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We also have, in this document, Boyar Motak. And I don't know, nobleman might be stretching it a bit with this guy.
Yeah, so a boyar was essentially a member of this old nobility in this region. You can think of them as powerful landowners, often with their own agendas.
Right, and Motak seems to be, like, the poster child for those hidden agendas. The document paints him as both a traitor and a victim.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
So what do these relationships tell us about Lăpușneanu?
Well, I think it goes back to that term we talked about, voivod. Remember, Lăpușneanu lived in a world defined by power. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford.
Oh, I bet. That sounds exhausting, like a constant game of chess, but the stakes are life or death.
Exactly. Always anticipating betrayal, always one step ahead. These relationships really highlight that constant pressure, the impossible choices. which kind of brings us back to the idea of antithesis.
Right, the whole opposite qualities thing.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, Bakuninal is almost a study in antithesis. You know, he's cruel, yet he loves. He's strong, but vulnerable. It's this complexity, this push and pull that makes him so fascinating.
He's like a walking contradiction.
He was-
So how did the writer even, begin to tackle this? What's the writing like?
It's fast-paced. I mean, think vivid descriptions, dialogue that puts you right in the thick of it.
Less like reading a book, more like watching a movie.
Exactly. And the language itself is fascinating. It's a blend of formal and informal, reflecting the social hierarchy of the time.
Like how a peasant would speak to Lăpușneanu versus how, another nobleman would.
You got it. And you'll also find popular sayings, proverbs, rooting the story in that everyday language of the people.
Uh-huh.
It creates a sense of authenticity or rawness that really draws you in.
So we're not just studying Lăpușneanu, we're experiencing his world through the language itself.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of raw, we should probably address the elephant in the room a little bit.
Yeah.
The violence in the story.
Yeah, no way around it. Definitely not a lighthearted fairy tale.
It's graphic, it's brutal, but I think it serves a purpose. It's not there just to shock.
Right.
The violence is very strategic.
So it's a window into the brutality of the era.
Precisely. Life in 16th century Moldavia was not for the faint of heart. And as uncomfortable as it might make us, I think it forces us to confront those harsh realities of the time.
Maybe appreciate our modern conveniences just a little bit more.
Right.
But jokes aside, it sounds like the author really wants us to understand the weight of Lăpușneanu's choices.
Absolutely, yeah. To ask ourselves, what would we do in his position?
Tough question. Speaking of tough questions, let's talk legacy.
Okay.
What's the lasting impression Alexandru Lăpușneanu leaves on us? Not just as his historical figure, but as a literary creation.
I think that's the heart of it, right? I mean, he was this historical figure who, yes, made brutal choices, but through this lens of literature, he becomes something more.
Almost like a cautionary tale.
Yeah, I think so, but also an exploration of the complexities of power, right?
Yeah.
Good versus evil, and our own need to try to understand figures who really defy easy categorization.
A puzzle we're still trying to solve.
Exactly, exactly.
And speaking of puzzles, our sources made a big deal about the structure of this story itself.
Yeah.
It's more than just the plot, right? The way it's written is just as important.
Absolutely. The language is incredibly evocative. Think, rich tapestries of Romanian folklore, history, all woven throughout the narrative.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, you'll find popular sayings, proverbs, even religious allusions kind of woven throughout the narrative.
So it's like the writer's really tapping into something ancient here. Primal even.
Exactly. And it reinforces the themes, deepens our understanding of the characters. Like, for example, Lăpușneanu, he often uses this very harsh, almost archaic language.
Huh?
And it really emphasizes his ruthlessness, his disconnect from everyday people.
So it's not just what he's saying, it's how he's saying it that really drives home who this guy is.
Precisely. And then you contrast that with, say, Doamna Roxanda, who often uses much more poetic language, even metaphorical language, which, again, highlights her more nuanced, complex nature.
It's like their words are weapons in a way.
Yes.
Shaping how other people see them, how they wield power.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so, big picture.
Yeah.
Our sources made a big deal about the structure of the story itself.
Right.
It's not just about what happens. It's about how the story's put together. Right?
It's very deliberate how the story unfolds. It's divided into 4 distinct chapters.
4 chapters, that's it. Even for me, that's a quick read. Is that typical?
For this kind of story, it is. Remember, we're talking about a novella here. It's not a sprawling epic, right?
Right.
It's about focused storytelling, zeroing in on these key events, these character interactions.
So it's like a laser beam, concentrated intensity.
Exactly. Each chapter is very carefully constructed to advance the plot, build that suspense, and kind of reveal another layer of Lăpușneanu's character as we go.
Right. All right. Give me a sneak peek. What's happening in these chapters?
Okay, so Chapter 1, it sets the stage right. We meet Lăpușneanu as he's returning to Moldavia after a period of exile.
Exile. Okay, now that's intriguing. I smell a backstory. He was kicked out, now he's back. Instant drama.
And he's not back for a social visit. He is determined to reclaim his throne.
This is like straight out of Game of Thrones, right? Okay. Everyone vying for power, betrayals left and right.
Oh, yeah, all of that. And the document highlights this very powerful declaration he makes in this first chapter, where he basically says, if you didn't want me, you have me.
Talk about an entrance. That's a guy who you Do not want to mess with.
He's making it crystal clear, like, he is not here to play games. He's back to rule, and he will use force to do it. And that really sets up the conflict, that tension that kind of carries us through the rest of the story.
Okay, so we survived Chapter 1. What about Chapter 2? Hit me.
Chapter 2 really zeroes in on Lăpușneanu's relationship with his wife, Doamna Alexandra.
Ah, yes. The angelic and demonic queen. This is going to be good.
It really provides another lens through which to view Lăpușneanu, you know, how he interacts with those closest to him.
So are we talking like lovey-dovey scenes here? Or more like power struggles behind closed doors?
I think it's much more complex than either of those.
Okay.
Remember, the story is all about antithesis, right?
Right.
And that includes his relationship with Alexandra. There's love, yeah, but there's also manipulation, there's suspicion, this constant battle for control.
Definitely not your fairy tale romance.
No, not at all. But it's a fascinating look at power dynamics, especially within a marriage, set against this backdrop of such a volatile period. And speaking of volatile, Chapter 3, things really explode.
Okay, this is where all the violence comes in.
Yeah.
What's the big event?
The document uses this Romanian phrase, Ucidere celor 47 ibuari,
Okay.
which basically translates to the killing of the 47 boyars.
Okay, that's a lot of boyars. And I'm guessing this wasn't exactly a peaceful difference of opinion.
You're catching on. It's brutal. It's a pivotal moment in the story. Really highlights the brutality of the time and the lengths to which Lăpușneanu will go to consolidate his power.
I bet this scene is vivid.
The sources really emphasize the sheer shock value of this event and how it cemented Lăpușneanu's reputation for, well, ruthlessness.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the public execution of 47 noblemen. It's calculated. It's a display of power meant to eliminate any opposition, to instill fear.
I can't imagine there were too many people questioning his authority after that.
Right.
Okay, so after all that, what's even left for Chapter 4? How do you top a mass execution?
Well, the final chapter brings us to Lăpușneanu's downfall.
Okay.
He falls ill, and he's refusing to appear weak, so he retreats to a monastery. And it's here we really see the weight of his actions, how his past has come back to haunt him.
But we were talking about, like, downfall earlier. Surely hanging out in a monastery isn't the end for Alexandru Lăpușneanu. This is a guy who took out 47 noblemen without batting an eye.
And you're right, even in his weakened state, he's still a force to be reckoned with. But there's a sense of inevitability, you know? A feeling that his past is catching up with him, even if it's metaphorical walls closing in this time.
So it's less about, like, physical defeat and more about the toll his choices have taken.
Exactly. Even the strongest rulers are mortal. Lăpușneanu is no exception. But even in decline, he's still such a fascinating figure.
It sounds like this last chapter really digs into the psychology of the character. Like, we're not just seeing what happens to him, but how he reacts to the situation he's created.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about that inner turmoil, the confrontation with his own mortality, maybe even some regret.
And that's where the comparison to Hamlet really comes into play, right?
Yeah.
Two powerful figures grappling with their demons, both internal and external.
Precisely. I mean, these are both incredibly intelligent characters, but their intelligence is often overshadowed by these darker impulses, right?
Right.
They're trapped in these cycles of violence and revenge, unable to escape their destinies.
Almost like they're doomed from the start.
Right.
There's a real sense of tragedy there.
Right.
But I imagine that's part of what makes it so captivating.
Absolutely. That element of tragedy, of watching someone wrestle with their own downfall, that's something we're drawn to. And I think we see ourselves in these characters, even in their flaws. We recognize that human cost of ambition, the struggle for power, the weight of our choices.
Speaking of human cost, our sources also made a big deal about the language of the story itself.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than just the plot. The way it's written is apparently just as important.
Exactly. The language is incredibly evocative. Think, rich tapestries of Romanian folklore and history woven throughout the narrative.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, you'll find these popular sayings, proverbs, even like religious allusions, and they're kind of woven throughout.
Wow.
It's really cool.
So it's like another layer of depth that the writer's bringing in.
Yeah, and it reinforces the themes, right? It deepens our understanding of these characters. Like, for instance, Lăpușneanu, he uses a lot of the time this very harsh, almost archaic language. And it really emphasizes, again, that ruthlessness, that disconnect from everyday people.
Right, because it's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it.
Exactly. And then, you contrast that with Doamna Alexandra, who often uses much more poetic language, even metaphorical language, which, again, highlights her more nuanced, complex nature.
Yeah, it's like, in a way, even their words are weapons.
Yes.
shaping how other people see them, how they wield power.
It's really fascinating.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
It's amazing to me how a story written, centuries ago can still resonate so powerfully today.
It speaks to that enduring power of great storytelling, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Alexandru Lăpușneanu might be a product of 16th central Moldavia, but those themes are timeless. Ambition, betrayal, the corrupting nature of power, these are universal experiences.
And they really are. So as we wrap up here, what's the final thought? What's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away with?
I really want our listeners to consider this. How does the blending of history and fiction, how does that shape how we view figures like Lăpușneanu? Do we judge them differently, knowing that these stories are crafted, that they have a specific purpose? And what does it say about us? That we're still so drawn to these figures who embody both great good and great evil.
That's a question worth pondering, for sure. Like, what makes a monster? Right? And is there always a glimmer of something else inside, no matter how deeply buried it might be? We may never have those answers, not definitively. But I think exploring these stories, these lives, it helps us understand ourselves just a little bit better.
And isn't that what a good story is supposed to do?
Right.
Make us think, make us feel, make us question.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the complexities of power, ambition, and the human heart. Until next time, happy reading.